Hi, Alliance members. This is Newell Augur coming to you with this week's report from Augusta for the week ending February 2nd. Actually coming to you from Yarmouth. It's snowing in Augusta and there's not too much going on anyway. But there was quite a bit that took place this week. First and foremost, the Maine People's Alliance and a number of other advocates for the poor and for elders turned in approximately 69,000 signatures earlier this week to put a ballot measure on the June ballot that would increase or create a universal home health access fund. It would be funded by a tax on earnings over about $125,000 or $700,000, and it would also include, I think, earnings on stocks, a tax of about 3.5% for passive income over that amount. And the money would go towards expanding access to home health care. We had a chance to meet with Ben Chin, who works for the Maine People's Alliance, had a great discussion with him about some of the reasons that he and his group organized and put this bill forward. And obviously, at the Alliance, we're going to work with all of you to gather information and get some input and how we will be responding to this going forward. From a technical standpoint, the Secretary of State now has 30 days to count all these signatures, make sure that's enough to get them on the ballot, or to cause a piece of legislation to be sent to the legislature, because that's how the process goes before it gets on the ballot. And then the legislature in March will have an opportunity to do one of three things: either to pass the bill as it's written, create a competing measure that they would put on the ballot, which is something different, maybe it's some different number, or ignore it, essentially indefinitely postpone it, and then send it directly to the voters. And that vote will take place in June if that happens. Some other things that took place at the State House this week: there was a bill to reduce the speed with which the minimum wage is implemented. It was a governor's bill, and it went to the Labor, Commerce and Economic Development Committee. There certainly seems to be support from the Chamber and others to reduce the velocity at which the minimum wage kicks in. As you know, it's at 10 now, it goes to 11 next year and 12 the year after that. There is also an automatic adjustment that's tied to, I believe, either inflation or the consumer price index. This piece of legislation would remove that. It would also create a training wage, which is for persons between the age of 16 and 20 who aren't claimed as a dependent on their parents' income tax, and that wage would be 80 or 85% of whatever the minimum wage is at the time. There does not seem to be a ton of support among Democrats to support that, and some of the folks in labor obviously have some heartburn over that change, and probably don't see much happening there, but there may be some tweaks around that. Another interesting hearing that took place yesterday was Alex Porteous, who you may remember was the finance guy at DHHS for a time, is now the commissioner of the Administrative and Financial Services, which is the department where Maine Revenue Services is housed. And he and Mike Allen, who's the state's premier tax expert, gave a presentation on the impact of the federal tax changes that were passed just late last year, on the Maine tax code. And there is certainly a push to have the Maine tax code conform to the federal tax code. Maine individual taxpayers are, I guess, expected to see a reduction of about $500 million in their taxes. But interestingly enough, when you get rid of all of the deductions from the federal level, if Maine is to conform to that, Maine taxpayers would lose about $250 million from that change. So I think what Commissioner Porteous made clear was they would like to promote or offer some legislation that would essentially negate that impact. Because if Maine were to create its own series of of deductions, the cost and the administrative burden and the opportunities for fraud would be so significant that it really wouldn't be worth the effort to try to keep that. So they're going to try to do some other things. I think maybe increase childhood or dependent deductions in the same way that the federal government has done to try to essentially negate the negative impact of removing or conforming the state tax code to the federal tax code. There's also been some discussions about opioid health homes in DHHS. That topic continues to be a very significant one, and trying to find recovery opportunities for persons who are suffering from opioid addiction. The question obviously always comes down to funds and where those funds going to come from. Something that obviously a battle that we know well. And next week we continue to have our meeting with Senate Minority Leader Troy Jackson, pushed off for scheduling issues on both sides. But we're hoping Molly and Vicky and I will have a chance to meet with him on Tuesday. He obviously is sponsored a major increase to a whole series of to long-term care providers, both in home health, but also nursing homes and assisted living, DD. And all of that is under his LD 1466. And certainly we want to be supportive of whatever vehicle the legislature ultimately decides is the way that we're going to try to get that additional $4 million secured for the fiscal year that starts on July 1st of this year. That's about it. Just want to make sure everyone knows I have my hat on and I'm ready for Sunday, and we'll hopefully have more good news for you for the next report next week. Take care.